In this video, we're going to talk about if you can use Philips Hue smart light bulbs or any other smart bulb brands in the background of your videos, that is, being seen in your video frame when filming videos like this one for YouTube, or even just a virtual meeting or filming anything in general with a video camera like I'm using here. And the short answer is, unfortunately, it depends. And we'll talk about what it depends on coming up. And real quick, I noticed on my initial upload to YouTube and watching this back on my iPhone that some of these effects I'm going to be talking about were mitigated or lessened by YouTube's processing. And it's possible that YouTube hasn't finished processing the video when I first watched it back and didn't see the effects I was talking about. But again, I was watching on a small screen, so it's probably best to view this on a larger screen, a laptop screen, even a 24-inch monitor like I use here at my desk to see what's going on. Because regardless of whether these effects show up on a platform like YouTube, they're definitely present in the original video file and they're going to affect your footage overall. So watch, learn, and record well. Later. So I actually did a lot of video tests using both of my cameras with different frame rates, shutter speeds, and different smart light bulbs like the Philips Hue bulbs, as well as some IKEA smart bulbs, and changing the bulbs to different colors and seeing the results. And I was just going to include those tests in this video, but for the sake of keeping this video a bit shorter, I'm going to post those tests in a second video so you can check out the description or my video library to see the results of those tests. But for now, onwards. So, can you use Philips Hue light bulbs or any other brand smart light bulbs in the videos as background, accent, or even key lighting when filming videos with cameras like the ones I'm using right now, which are both DSLR-style mirrorless cameras, a Panasonic GH5 and a Sony a7 III? Well, long story short, it is possible in some cases, but that possibility depends primarily on some more professional features that your camera may or may not have. And if these two different views from each of my cameras tells you anything, at the very least, it shows you that it can simply depend on which camera you use. And I am able to use Philips Hue bulbs in my videos because of some of the more professional features available on the Panasonic GH5, but also because of a bit of luck with how the GH5 processes video differently than other cameras like the Sony a7 III. But if you're serious about how your videos look and filming in your office or studio space are your primary goals, you may not want to start building a studio around consumer smart bulbs like Philips Hue bulbs. You'll probably want to start building out a studio with video-specific lighting, that is, lighting that is meant to be filmed with a video camera. Why? Because most often, as you can see in this shot from my Sony a7 III, consumer smart bulbs like Philips Hue bulbs can and usually will produce a flicker in your video, or more of a slow, vertical, scrolling visual roll moving up or down the video frame. And it's fairly apparent in the shot and both of the Philips Hue bulbs behind me. Oh, real quick, remember that we're talking about this light here, not these, and the light that's in this lamp, not these. These are just for decorative looks. They don't interfere too much and create any flicker, but the Philips Hue bulbs, again, are the ones we're talking about, there and there, as they sit behind me in this view. You can actually see right down here in this shot from my Sony, you've got this kind of scrolling flicker going on, and it's a little less apparent in this one, not that bulb, but the bulb in that little lamp right there. You can see the visual roll. Let me turn off those other lights. Turn off Edison lights. All right, so that may make it a little more apparent in that light behind me, but I kind of want the Edison lights on in this. Turn on Edison lights. All right, let's continue. And unfortunately, you really can't edit this out in post. It's kind of just there and you're stuck with it. So it's most often better to use light bulbs and other lights that are designed to not produce this flicker when filmed, like this Aperture B7C bulb, which is technically a smart light bulb because it's controllable via a Wi-Fi network and a smartphone app, but it doesn't produce this video flicker when filmed. And this flicker that your camera can see typically has more to do with the light, more so than the camera. But as I said, I am able to still use some Philips Hue bulbs and other consumer smart bulbs in the background of my videos, but really only with my Panasonic GH5 in most cases. So as I said, I have two Philips Hue lights behind me right now, and as you can see, I really don't get any flicker using my GH5, but I do with my Sony a7 III. odd, but again, this is just a bit of luck in my case. But I'm glad some of my camera and lighting choices still work well in my space because I have my entire house and studio set up on Apple HomeKit, and I love being able to just turn my entire studio lighting on and off by either selecting a scene on my iPhone or just telling Siri, turn off office. And my office lighting turns off for the most part. And now I can tell Siri to enable my record video scene. Record video. And I'm back in business with all of my lighting with a single command instead of having to turn on multiple lights individually and without having to use multiple proprietary remote controls. So it is possible to use your consumer smart bulbs in your studio setting depending on your camera. It's just not advisable because you may get differing results with different cameras, different frame rates, different shutter speeds. And honestly, this can also change depending on the color you choose if your light is a full color RGB light. So my GH5 works well for this, but not so much my Sony a7 III. And the GH5 is a decently older camera and is typically aimed at more advanced users. It's definitely a camera that has a lot of settings that you may or may not know are there, and you may not even want to mess with. And Sony has become one of the leading brands in small, full frame, and APS-C cameras with great autofocus, and that means a lot of people may be using Sony cameras in their studios over something like the Panasonic GH5 because the Sonys are just more user-friendly. And I think this is why you may really need to start thinking about your lighting choices so your videos look as professional as possible so that you can just turn on the camera and get to recording without fiddling with too many settings and knowing that you won't generally get any video flicker. Anyway, a lot of people out there, myself included, probably don't immediately start thinking about their background or accent lighting choices when starting a YouTube channel, or when having to move to live streaming over the past few years, or when filming anything around your house, your office, etc. But it is important to think about these things, do some test recordings, and make sure your videos don't have any unwanted video artifacts like lighting flicker. And actually, I have less video flicker with either camera using IKEA's Trad-free series bulbs. They just don't produce the same flicker all of the time with identical camera settings, so IKEA smart lights may be a way to go instead of Philips Hue, but again, it's not 100% guaranteed. And I have some examples of Philips Hue versus these IKEA bulbs in my second video showing all of my testing, so check the description for a link to that video. So again, I'm filming this with both my cameras at the same time. Again, my Panasonic GH5, a camera with its smaller micro four thirds sensor, and my Sony a7 III with its larger full frame sensor. And both of these bulbs behind me are actually Philips Hue full color smart bulbs. I just had them set to a warm setting right now. And again, you can see from the main view of my Panasonic GH5 that you really don't get any lighting flicker using the GH5 with Philips Hue bulbs in my background, filming at 23.98 frames per second with 1/50th of the second shutter speed. But if we just switch to my Sony full frame a7 III, all of a sudden you can clearly see this video flicker, even though my Sony a7 III is also filming at 23.98 frames per second and also has a shutter speed of 1/50th of a second. So pretty much matching settings between cameras. But obviously we get this video flicker with the combination of my Sony a7 III and these Philips Hue lights. But it just so happens that these same settings with my GH5 and the combination of Philips Hue bulbs work just fine and I don't get any flicker. So why do we get a clean image with the Panasonic GH5 but not with the Sony a7 III? Well, the answer is twofold. Number one, luck. Honestly, I didn't plan it this way. I already own Philips Hue bulbs and other smart bulbs for my office before I bought a camera and started filming in this space. And there just weren't any issues and I didn't even think about it until I bought a second camera, the Sony a7 III, and noticed the video flicker when using that same camera with my Philips Hue bulbs and other lighting. And from what I gather with the GH5 specifically, it has more to do with the sensor size and computing power inside the cameras and the speed at which these cameras can read the information off of their sensors and how that readout speed differs from the frequency of lighting being produced by these bulbs. Since the Panasonic GH5 sensor is much smaller than the full frame sensor on the Sony a7 III, the GH5's components can read information off of that sensor faster than the Sony can read the information off of its sensor. And that difference of sensor readout speed versus the frequency of light output from the Philips Hue bulbs mean that the Sony can see this video flicker, whereas the GH5 usually cannot. I'm not saying that's 100% the reason, but it's the only explanation that I can give as to why the GH5 and the Sony cameras differ with this video flicker, given what I know of digital cameras. But again, this is mainly just luck for me. I didn't plan this. It just happens to work decently well at my preferred frame rate of 23.98 frames per second. But even if the GH5 did see some video flicker, it has one additional feature that not a lot of other cameras in this category have that can compensate and get rid of this flicker, and that's the synchro scan feature. Synchro scan lets you really fine tune the shutter speed so that instead of only having options like 1/50th of a second and then the next shutter speed is 1/60th of a second, the synchro scan feature on the GH5 means you can dial in the shutter speed to something in between 1/50th and 1/60th, like 152.2 of a second or 1/64th of a second. And having the synchro scan feature allows you to adjust the shutter speed to match lighting that may be flickering. And it also allows me to adjust the shutter speed to be able to film other light sources that have different refresh rate, like filming a TV or computer screen. So I use the synchro scan feature a lot on the Panasonic GH5, but luckily I don't have to always use it because the sensor readout time doesn't interfere too much with the lighting frequency of my Philips Hue light bulbs. Hang on, I want to show you something. All right, to show you this, I've changed the GH5's frame rate to 29.97 frames per second with a 1/60th shutter speed, and we can now see this video flicker coming from the Philips Hue bulb and the combination of the GH5, 29.97 frames per second, and 1/60th of a shutter speed, which you can see right down there. But if I just turn on synchro scan, give me a second here, we can now choose a very finely tuned frame rate. So you can see right here, I'm set at 1/60th, but I'm going to just bump this up until I see that video flicker go away. And if we just go up to, just keep going up until the video flicker kind of goes away. There, 162.3. So now, effectively, our shutter speed is at 162.3 of a second instead of just a flat 1/60th, and we've now gotten rid of the video flicker using synchro scan. And that's why I really like the synchro scan feature. It just lets you really fine-tune that shutter speed to whatever it needs to be to get rid of varying, flickering things in your video. All right, hang on. Back to 23.98 frames a second. All right, but the Sony a7 III doesn't have this synchro scan feature, so you're stuck with fixed shutter speeds at their regular intervals like 1/50th, 1/60th, 1/80th, 1/100th, and so on. To this date, I think the only Sony cameras that have a finely tunable shutter speed are their cinema line, the FX9, the FX6, but oddly enough, not the FX3. But I believe the Sony a7 IV also has this variable shutter speed feature, which may allow you to get rid of video or lighting flicker. But I haven't gotten my hands on the Sony a7 IV just yet, so I can't fully test this feature, but it should work just like synchro scan and should give you the ability to finely tune your shutter speed and potentially get rid of some lighting flicker using your Sony camera. Now, another method to get around some of this video flicker with different cameras is to change your frame rate. And I did have some luck with my Sony a7 III when I changed my frame rates over to the PAL standard frame rates of 25 frames or 50 frames per second. And I have an example of that in my companion video to this video where I show all of my tests, so check the description below. But I did find that putting the a7 III in the PAL standard did allow me to film my Philips Hue bulbs without getting much, if any, video flicker. The only downside with the a7 III is that if you want to go between North American frequencies or NTSC frame rates like 23.98, 29.97, 59.94, and then switch over to PAL to get that even 25 or 50 frames per second, the camera requires you to reformat the card. So you either have to have spare cards so you don't have to reformat your current cards, or you have to keep your camera in either NTSC or PAL at all times. Some cameras can't switch back and forth between North American and European frame rates quickly, but if you're just filming yourself in your home studio or office and filming in 25 frames per second allows you to use your current lighting you already own, which may include Philips Hue bulbs, and you're just uploading to YouTube, then you're fine. There's nothing wrong with filming at a frame rate that's different than the standard of the continent you live on. You can film in 25 frames per second here in the United States and upload to YouTube. No one's going to know the difference or really care, to be honest, because we're consuming everything on the internet anyway, so frame rates don't always matter. But if you're on a client shoot or filming in correlation with other cameras and all of your frame rates need to match, then that may cause some logistical or editing issues if you are filming in 25 frames per second, but your other cameras are filming at 23.98. But it is something to try if you don't want to go out and spend a bunch of money replacing all the lighting in your office, but you already own a full frame camera like the Sony a7 III. So there are workarounds and ways to use your current Philips Hue lighting in your videos, like having a more expensive camera with more professional features or filming at a different frame rate. if your camera even has those frame rates, like those PAL frame rates of 25 or 50 frames per second. But it's not always guaranteed to work as well as lighting that's designed to be filmed. Your results may vary, and you may not be able to use the footage if you find that you can't get rid of the video flicker or video roll. Just be aware of all of this if you plan to start a YouTube studio, a virtual home office, or a streaming setup. I am able to still use Philips Hue bulbs, mainly because I own and use a Panasonic GH5, and therefore I don't have to go out and replace all of my lighting. But if you're just starting out building a studio, I would probably start building my lighting inventory on video-specific lighting like the Aperture B7C bulbs, or pocket lights like this Bowling P1, or any of the larger Aperture, Neewer, Godox, GVM, bicolor, or full RGB lights, or even tube lights like these Quasar tubes, as all of these lights are meant to be in videos and not produce flicker. So that's it for this video. Hopefully some of this information has been helpful to you, but if you want to see some more examples of this in action and some possible solutions when trying different frame rates and shutter speeds, then be sure to look for and watch my follow-up video to this video where I go through and show more examples from my GH5 and from my Sony a7 III with those different frame rates and shutter speeds and some, again, possible solutions with using what you already have. But that's it for now. Just keep these things in mind as you plan out your studio space, your camera, and your lighting choices. Good luck. See you soon.